The wind in the high Arizona desert had a sound like a blade. It cut across the sparse bunchgrass and hissed through the juniper trees that dotted Eli Langford's land. Winter near Prescott was not a gentle thing. It was bone cold, a dry, sharp cold that found its way through the chinking of his cabin and settled deep in a man's lungs. Eli was alone, and had been for 3 years. His world had shrunk to the size of his modest ranch, a small, tight cabin built of ponderosa pine, a leaning barn, a stone-walled corral, and the frozen patch of earth up on the ridge where he had buried his wife. His companions were his rifle, which leaned clean and oiled against the wall, and his dog, Buck, a yellow hound mix who slept by the hearth. Eli tended his small herd of cattle, fixed his fences, and chopped wood. He lived by the necessities. He spoke little, and when he did, it was usually to the dog. The silence in the cabin was heavy. It was the silence left by Talika. She had been Apache. He had traded for her, then married her, in defiance of the town and the territory. She had been quiet and strong, and he had loved her in a way that felt like finding shelter in a storm. Then she had died, her body broken in childbirth, taking their nameless son with her. That was 3 years gone. Now, Eli Langford just survived. He was a man made of edges and silence, hollowed out by the loss, living on the hostile edge of a land that tolerated him but did not welcome him. That night, the cold was deeper than usual. Eli sat by his stove, cleaning his revolver by the light of a kerosene lamp. Buck, asleep on the rag rug, lifted his head, a low whine in his throat. Eli paused. He heard it, too. Distant gunfire, a quick volley, 3 shots, then 2 more, faint, carried on the wind from the south. He did not move. He listened. The silence rushed back in, broken only by the howl of the wind over the chimney. He had heard it before. Bounty hunters, most likely, or maybe soldiers from Verde. The territory was full of men hunting other men. They chased deserters, bandits, and Apaches, especially Apaches. There was good money in scalps, and better money in live prisoners for the reservations. Eli felt nothing. It was not his business. The world could tear itself apart just beyond his fence line, and it would not change the fact that his stove needed wood and his cattle needed feed. He finished cleaning the gun, snapped the cylinder shut, and barred the cabin door. He ignored the sounds of the night and went to his cold bed. The next morning, the sky was the color of slate. A thin layer of frost covered everything, making the hard ground glitter. Eli pulled on his thick coat and boots, his breath pluming in the air. Buck ran ahead of him toward the barn. Eli's chores were a ritual. He broke the ice in the water trough with the heel of his boot, the sound sharp in the stillness. He checked his cattle, counting the 4 scrawny cows huddled against the lee of the barn. It was Buck who found her. The dog stopped near the trough, his tail stiff, and let out a low, uncertain growl. "What is it, boy?" Eli muttered. He walked over. At first, he thought it was a deer, wounded and crawled away to die. Then he saw the shape. It was a person, collapsed in the frozen mud near the trough, one hand outstretched as if reaching for the water. It was a woman. He knelt. She was Apache. Her black hair was wild, matted with mud and burrs. Her dress was not buckskin. It was torn calico, cheap settler clothing, ripped at the shoulder and soaked through. She was barely more than skin and bones, her face sharp with starvation, her lips cracked and blue. Her cheeks and fingers were the dead, waxy white of severe frostbite. Eli looked at her wrists. They were raw, rubbed bloody and dark with deep, purple bruises, rope burns. She had been tied. He stood up, his face hard. A fugitive. She must have escaped whatever pursuit he heard last night. His first thought was practical and cold. The authorities in Prescott paid a reward for runaways. He needed supplies. He needed flour, salt, and ammunition. He needed money. And here was money, half dead, by his water trough. He could tie her up, throw her in the barn, and ride to town come morning. He nudged her shoulder with his boot. "Get up." A low moan escaped her. It was a sound of such complete exhaustion that it barely sounded human. She stirred, her eyelids fluttering. He grabbed her shoulder, meaning to haul her to her feet, but as he touched her, she turned her head, and her eyes opened. They were black and bottomless, but it was not fear he saw in them. It was a hollowness, an emptiness so profound it startled him. It was the look of someone who had already seen the end of the world and had nothing left to lose. She focused on his face, on his beard, on the rifle in his other hand. She tried to push herself up onto her elbows, but she was too weak. She spoke. Her voice was a dry rasp, the English broken and thick. "Please," she whispered. "No prison, please." Eli stared down at her, his hand still on her shoulder. He said nothing. Her eyes searched his. She saw the cabin behind him. She saw the cattle. She saw a man, alone. She processed this with a desperate, animal quickness. "I will work," she gasped, the words costing her. She pushed herself up a few more inches, her body trembling violently from the cold and the effort. "I will wash your feet. I will be your woman. I will give offspring." Eli's hand dropped from her shoulder as if she had struck him. He took a step back. He was stunned. He had seen desperation before. He had seen poverty and starvation. But he had never seen this. She was not begging for mercy. She was making a bargain. She was offering the only thing she had left, her body, her service, her future, in exchange for her life. It was so raw, so direct. It bypassed shame. He looked at the bruises on her wrists, at the torn dress, at the hollow desperation in her eyes. This was what the world had done to her. This was the bottom. He was a hard man, but this naked offering of a life broke through his numbness. He felt a sudden, sharp anger, though he did not know if it was at her, or at the men who hunted her, or at the whole damn territory. He looked away from her, toward the mountains. He was unsure what to do. He could not shoot her. He could not, after that, turn her in for money. But he could not bring her into his cabin. That was Talika's place. "Get up," he said again, his voice rough. She tried, but her legs buckled. He grunted, picked her up. She weighed almost nothing. Her head fell against his chest, and he could feel the faint, cold puff of her breath through his coat. He carried her not to the house, but to the barn. The barn was cold, but it was out of the wind. It smelled of hay and manure. He set her down on a pile of clean straw in an empty stall. She curled into herself immediately, shivering. "Stay here," he commanded. He left her and went back to the trough, breaking the rest of the ice. He worked for an hour, his movements jerky, throwing feed to the cattle, his mind churning. He was angry at her for showing up, angry for bringing this trouble to his door, angry that she looked at him with those eyes. He went back to the barn. She had not moved. He barred the heavy wooden door from the outside. He told himself it was to keep her from running, but he knew it was to keep her contained, to keep this problem separate from his life while he thought. He went back to his cabin. Buck watched him, whining. "Hush," Eli said. He sat at his table, staring at the wood grain. For a long time. Night fell. The wind picked up again. He built up the fire in the stove, but the cabin felt colder than before. He could not settle. He kept thinking of her, lying on the straw in the dark. Then he heard it. It came through the wind, a thin sound from the barn. At first he thought she was crying. It was a low, rhythmic sobbing, a sound of profound grief. Then the sound changed. It became a chant. She was praying, or singing. It was in her native tongue. He didn't understand the words, but he knew the cadence. Talika had prayed like that, in those same rising and falling tones, when the sickness came, when the labor began. The sound cut Eli to the core. It was the sound of a woman alone, preparing to die. He stood up abruptly. He ladled what was left of his venison stew into a bowl. It was not much, but it was hot. He grabbed a tin cup, filled it with water from the barrel, and took one of his blankets from the shelf. He went out into the black cold, Buck at his heels. When he unbarred the barn door, the sound stopped. He pushed the door open. It was dark inside. He could hear her scramble back into the corner of the stall, a sharp intake of breath. She thought he had come for her. Eli lit the lantern he kept by the door. The small flame pushed back the shadows. She was huddled against the far wall, her eyes wide in the light, watching him like a trapped animal. He did not speak. He set the lantern on a hook. He walked to the stall, put the bowl of stew, the cup of water, and the blanket on the hay, just inside the stall. Then he backed away several steps, keeping his hands visible. She watched him. He watched her. The silence stretched. Finally, slowly, she crawled forward. Her eyes never left his face. She grabbed the cup and drank, gulping the water down so fast she choked. She drank it all. Then she reached for the stew. She ate with her fingers, slowly, painfully. It was clear her throat was raw, and she was so starved that eating was work. But she ate every bit of it, wiping the inside of the bowl clean with her finger. She set the bowl down and pulled the blanket around her shoulders, her body shaking. They just looked at each other for a moment. The barn was quiet, save for the wind. "What is your name?" Eli asked. His voice was too loud in the small space. She swallowed. "Nolin," she said. The name was quiet, but clear. Nolin. The name meant nothing to him, but the sound of it, the simple fact of it, made her real. She was not just a fugitive. She was Nolin. Eli's mind flashed to his wife, Talika, also Apache. He looked at Nolin, huddled in his blanket, and he saw the ghost of his wife. He saw the same black hair, the same strong lines of her face, now gaunt with hunger. He remembered the insults he had endured in Prescott for walking with Talika. He remembered the hatred in the storekeeper's eyes. He remembered the loneliness they shared. He and Nolin were separated by the stall bars, by language, by fear, but a quiet echo of memory passed between them. She did not know why he looked at her with such sudden, sharp grief. She only saw that his hardness had cracked. She saw that he, too, was broken. Eli stood there for another minute. He felt the pull of her offer. Be your woman. Give offspring. He was a lonely man. It had been 3 long years. But he looked at her, at the bruises and the frostbite and the absolute terror she was trying to hide. And he felt a cold shame. To touch her now would be no better than the men who hunted her. It would be taking what she offered only because she had no choice. It would be a betrayal of her, and a betrayal of the woman he had buried on the hill. He said nothing. He turned, took the lantern from the hook, and walked out of the barn. He pulled the door shut. But this time, he did not drop the bar. He left her unlocked. He went back to the cabin, the dog following him. He did not know what he would do tomorrow. He did not know if she would be there, or if she would run. He did not know if he was sheltering her or just postponing the inevitable. For now, he had fed her. For now, he had not touched her. And for now, he was not riding to Prescott. The snow began the day after he left the barn door unbarred. It fell thick and silent, a white curtain that dropped over the territory, erasing the mountains and the hard lines of the earth. It was a blanketing, isolating snow that locked the world in place. Nolin did not run. She had nowhere to run. For the first 2 days, she stayed in the barn, as if the unlocked door were a test she was afraid to fail. Eli brought her food, biscuits and jerky, twice a day. He brought her a second blanket and a small kerosene lamp. He said little. He watched her. She was mending the horse blanket, her fingers still stiff from the frostbite, but moving with a deliberate, neat stitch. On the 3rd day, the temperature dropped so low the air felt like glass. Eli found her in the barn stall, huddled over the lamp for warmth. her breath a cloud of white fog. She was shivering so badly she could not hold the cup of water he offered. He stared at her for a long moment. The barn was a tomb of cold. She would not last the night. "Get your things," he said, his voice rough. She looked up, confused. "The blanket! The lamp! Bring them!" He turned and walked back to the cabin, not looking to see if she followed. He left the door open. He heard her hesitant steps on the snow-covered porch. A pause, and then the quiet scrape of her moccasins on his wooden floor. He did not acknowledge her. He pointed to the hearth. "There, by the fire!" She moved like a shadow, settling onto the rag rug Buck had claimed. The dog, instead of growling, walked over, sniffed her, and laid his head on her lap. Nalin froze. Then, slowly, her hand came up to stroke the dog's ears. Eli turned away, uncomfortable. He sat at his table, cleaning tack he had already cleaned, the smell of leather oil filling the small space. And so the days passed. The snow kept falling. Nalin recovered her strength, but she remained a creature of silence. The hollowness in her eyes began to fill, replaced by a deep, constant watchfulness. She made herself useful. She was not idle, not for a moment. When she saw his socks, worn through at the heel, she took them from the pile by his cot. He found them the next morning, darned with a stitch so fine it was barely visible. She found his spare shirt, missing 2 buttons, and sewed them on, using thread she had salvaged from a ripped grain sack. She began to cook. Eli was used to his own grim fare: salty bacon, dry biscuits, and stringy venison stew. One afternoon, he came in from feeding the cattle to find the cabin filled with the smell of corn and herbs. She had found his meager stores and made a thick, savory stew. Stretching the last of his venison with dried roots she must have recognized from her time in the wild. She cleaned without being asked. She swept the floor, washed his few dishes until they shone, and wiped the soot from the lamp chimneys. She did it all quietly, effacing herself, moving around him as if she were air, trying to take up no space at all. Eli watched her. It was a strange and painful comfort. She was not Talika. Talika had been softer, quicker to laugh in the rare moments they were safe. Nalin was harder, quieter, shaped by a different, sharper pain. But she was Apache. The way she moved, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the low humming sound she sometimes made while she worked. It all brought Talika back to him with a force that made his chest ache. He allowed her to sleep by the fire. It was the warmest place. He kept to his cot, his back to her, the rifle leaning against the wall, always between them. The silence of the cabin was different now. It was no longer the empty, dead silence of his grief. It was a shared silence, tight with unspoken things. He would read his almanac by the lamp, and he could feel her watching him. He could feel the weight of her presence, of her offer. "I will be your woman. I will give offspring." One night, perhaps a week after she had moved inside, the unspoken thing finally surfaced. The fire had burned down to red coals. The wind howled outside. Eli was in his cot, drifting in that gray space before sleep. He heard her stir on the hearth. He opened his eyes. She was standing beside him. In the dim red light from the stove, she looked like a spirit. Her hair was down, clean now, falling over the shoulders of the worn blanket. He didn't move, did not speak. Slowly, she knelt by the cot. She did not look at his face. She looked at his hands, resting on the blanket. Then she began to lift the edge of her own blanket, intending to lie beside him. It was not a seduction. It was a deliberate, practical movement. It was the fulfillment of her bargain. Eli's hand shot out and caught her wrist. She stopped, her eyes flying to his. Fear flickered in them. He held her wrist, but gently. His thumb rubbed the last of the rope burns. "I'm not that kind of man," he whispered, his voice hoarse. He pushed her away, but it was a gentle push, a rejection that held no anger, just a deep, unbridgeable sorrow. Nalin did not retreat to the fire. She stayed kneeling by the cot, her blanket clutched to her chest. She looked at him, and her gaze was steady. "I offer," she said, her English soft but precise, "because I want to stay. I have no place. My people are gone from me. The white men hunt me. I need a place. I need a man." She paused, and her eyes seemed to look straight through him, seeing the rot and grief he kept hidden. "Even a broken one," she finished. Eli let out his breath, a sharp hiss. He sat up, swinging his legs over the side of the cot. He ran his hands through his hair. He felt old. "You think I'm broken?" he said. It was not a question. "I think you are hollow," she replied. "Like me." He looked at the floor. "I'm not fit to love anyone. Nalin, I'm not fit to keep anyone safe. I already lost one Apache woman. I buried her on that hill." He pointed toward the window, toward the unseen ridge in the dark. "Her name was Talika. She died in this cabin. Died trying to give me a son." He spoke to the floorboards, the words dragging out of him. "And the town, Prescott, they never forgave me for marrying her. When she got sick, they wouldn't help. The doctor wouldn't come. They whispered. They called her names. And when she died, they were glad." He looked up at her, his eyes burning in the dim light. "I cannot protect you. I failed her. I am not the man you need." Nalin listened. She absorbed his story, her expression unchanged, as if she were listening to the wind. When he was finished, she finally spoke, sharing her own burden. "My tribe accused me," she said, her voice flat. "There was a massacre. Settlers, soldiers. They raided a winter camp. But our warriors were waiting. Someone had warned them. The soldiers were killed." "But the warriors were angry. They said the settlers had Apache women with them. They said those women were spies, traitors." She looked at her hands. "I was nearby. I was visiting a friend, a white woman who lived near the post. I was trying to warn her to hide. When the warriors found me, they found me near the white man's road. They said I was the one. They said I spied for the soldiers. They said I betrayed my people." "They were wrong," she whispered. "But they did not listen. They beat me. They would have stoned me." She paused. "So I ran. I ran from my own people. And I ran from the whites who hunt survivors." She met his gaze. "If my tribe finds me, they will kill me. If the bounty hunters find me, they will sell me or kill me for the reward. I have no home. Eli Langford, you are broken. I am hunted. We are the same." Eli looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time. She was not just a victim. She was an outcast, same as him. She was caught between two worlds, and both wanted her dead. He reached out, his hand hovering, and then he touched her hair, just for a second. "You're safe here," he said. The words hung in the air. It was a promise. It was a chain. He didn't know which. She nodded, a small, sharp movement. She stood up, went back to the hearth, and lay down. Eli lay back on his cot. Neither of them slept. The next evening, the tension between them was different. It was not the tension of a man and a woman. It was the tension of two confessions, two wounds laid bare in the tiny cabin. Eli came in from the barn, his feet numb with cold. The snow caked to his trousers. He sat heavily by the stove, pulling off his frozen gloves. He began to work at the laces of his boots, his fingers stiff and aching. Nalin put down the shirt she was mending. She went to the stove, filled his small tin wash basin with hot water from the kettle, and brought it over. She knelt at his feet. "No," Eli said, pulling his foot back. "I can do it." "Let me," she said. It was not a plea. It was a statement. "You said I am safe. This is my place. Let me." He hesitated. His pride fought with his exhaustion. He looked at her determined face, and he relented. He was so very tired. He put his foot back and let her pull his heavy boot off. His sock was soaked and stiff with frost. She peeled it off gently. His foot was white and wrinkled from the cold. She eased it into the hot water. The feeling was a sharp, aching relief. Eli closed his eyes, his head falling back against the wall. Nalin washed his feet. It was a slow, practical act. She washed away the grime of the barn, the sweat and the cold. It was humble. It was intimate. It was something Talika had never done. It felt more raw than a kiss. He opened his eyes. She was bent over her work, her black hair falling forward. He watched her hands. They were thin, but strong. They were healing from the frostbite. But as she scrubbed his other foot, her sleeve rode up. He saw her wrist. The rope burns were fading, but above them, on her forearm, was an old scar, a perfect circle, the brand of a cattle iron. He did not ask. When she finished, she began to dry his feet with a clean rag. Her hand brushed his. He reached down, intending to take the rag, and his hand covered hers. He stopped. Her hand was small under his. He turned it over. Her palm was calloused. He looked up, and his eyes met hers. She was not looking at him with submission. She was looking at him with a quiet, terrible understanding. She saw the grief behind his eyes. She saw the loneliness he tried to hide with his hard words. She saw the ghost of Talika that lived in the cabin with them. And he looked at her. He saw the strength that had kept her alive. He saw the scars, and as he looked, she turned slightly to reach for the basin. The firelight caught her back. Her dress, the cheap calico, was thin. Through it, he saw the ridges of her spine, and something more. He reached out, his fingers tracing a line on the calico. "What is this?" She went still. "A mark." "From your people?" "Yes." He stood, moved behind her, and lifted the back of her dress. She did not resist. In the flickering light, her skin was covered in a network of old scars. They were pale, silvered lines, crossing each other, layered, the marks of a lashing, a punishment delivered with fury. He let the dress fall. He felt a cold, hard rage build in his chest. He stepped back, away from her, and leaned against the cabin wall, his breath unsteady. She had endured this, and still offered to be his woman. "They were wrong," she said softly, to the fire. "I know," he said. That night, the blizzard hit. It came without warning. A wall of white that descended from the mountains. The wind screamed, a high, thin sound that never stopped. For 3 days, the world disappeared. Eli and Nalin were trapped in the cabin. They could not open the door without the snow and wind blasting inside. The small room was lit only by the kerosene lamp. Day and night. The wind was so loud they had to shout to be heard, so mostly they were silent. The cabin became a pressure cooker. The air grew thick with their shared presence. They ate cold biscuits and jerky. They sat. He oiled his guns. She mended. They listened to the storm. By the third night, the tension was unbearable. They were 2 people on a small raft in a howling sea. The world was gone. There was only the cabin, the wind, and each other. Eli sat on his cot, staring at the stove. He was lost in a memory of Talika, her hand on his, her laughter. The grief was so sharp it felt new. Nalin came and sat on the floor, her back against his cot, near his legs. She did not touch him. They just sat, listening to the world try to tear itself apart. He looked down at the top of her head. He could smell her hair, the clean, smoky smell of her. He did not know how long they sat like that. An hour, 2. Finally, she turned. She looked up at him. Her face was calm, her eyes dark in the lamplight. She had seen his scars. He had seen hers. There was nothing left to hide. She raised her hand and put it on his knee, a simple, warm weight. Eli did not move. He was frozen. She rose to her knees. bringing her face level with his. She looked at him, searching his eyes. Then, slowly, she leaned in. Nahlan kissed him first. It was not a passionate kiss. It was soft. It was chapped lips against his beard. It was a question. It was a choice. And Eli, after 3 years of stone-cold loneliness, gave in. He put his hand on the back of her neck and kissed her back. It was tender. It was aching. It was the release of so much pain, so much solitude. It was not love. It was need. It was 2 broken things clinging together in the dark. He pulled her onto the cot. They slept together. It was not wild. It was a quiet, desperate coupling, a confirmation of life in the middle of a storm that sounded like death. After, when she lay asleep, her breath finally even, her body curled against his for warmth, Eli lay awake. He looked at the ceiling, at the familiar cracks in the pine, and he wept. He did not make a sound. The tears just ran, hot, down his temples and into his hair. He was ashamed. He was ashamed of his weakness. He had taken this woman, this fugitive, this desperate soul. He had betrayed Talika's memory. He had become the kind of man he swore he was not. He felt Nahlan stir. She woke, not with a start, but slowly, as if sensing his pain. She turned in his arms. She saw the wetness on his face. She did not recoil. She did not ask why. She simply put her hand on his cheek. She held him, her small, scarred body pressed against his. He was a big man, but he felt small. He felt broken. "You still feel," she whispered, her voice rough with sleep. "That means you live." He closed his eyes, his shame warring with the simple comfort of her holding him. He put his arm around her and held on, burying his face in her hair. In the morning, the storm had passed. The silence that woke them was absolute. Eli woke first. He was afraid to open his eyes. He expected the cot to be empty. He expected the shame of the morning to be his alone. He expected her to have run, to have taken his food and a horse and fled, now that the bargain was, in its way, sealed. He opened his eyes. She was not in the cot, but she was not gone. Nahlan was at the stove, her back to him, stoking the fire. The smell of coffee, his last precious grounds, filled the cabin. She heard him move. She turned, the coffee pot in her hand. She looked at him, her eyes clear, steady. There was no shame in her gaze, no regret. She did not run. The snow melted with a slow, muddy reluctance. Spring came to the high desert not as a comfort, but as an exposure. The white blanket that had hidden the ranch dissolved, leaving the land raw and vulnerable. The smell of damp earth and pine resin replaced the sharp, clean scent of frost. Meltwater ran in noisy trickles down the washes. Eli felt the change in his bones. The snow had been a fortress. The mud was a map, ready to take the print of any man or horse that passed. Nahlan felt it too. She had moved back into the cabin, but she no longer sat by the fire. She spent her days near the window, her body still, her eyes scanning the long, empty stretch of land that led to the road. She was a deer sensing the wolf before it ever left the trees. The intimacy born in the blizzard had settled into a quiet, watchful domesticity. They lived around each other, their bodies familiar. He would come in from the cold, and she would have coffee hot. She would take his wet coat and hang it by the stove. He would watch her hands as she ground corn for biscuits. They slept in the same cot now, a shared warmth against the cold spring nights. But the promise he had made, "You're safe here," felt thinner with every day that passed. The danger arrived on a Tuesday, just after dawn. Buck, sleeping on the porch, let out a low growl that was half swallowed. Eli was at the stove, pouring coffee. He froze. He looked at Nahlan. She was already on her feet, her eyes wide, fixed on the window. He put the pot down and moved to her side. Far off, where the trail crested the first ridge, were 3 riders. They were not soldiers. They were moving too slowly, too deliberately, their eyes on the ground. Trackers. "The cellar," Eli said. His voice was cold, flat. The fragile peace of the last weeks shattered. Nalin did not panic. She moved with a silent, terrifying efficiency. She grabbed the rifle he had given her, a skinning knife, and a water skin. He ripped the rag rug from the floor, revealing the heavy plank trap door that led to the root cellar. He lifted it. A smell of cold earth and old potatoes rose from the blackness. It was a grave. Nalin looked at him. One last, quick glance. He could see the fear in her, but it was a cold, hard fear, not a weak one. She slipped into the hole without a sound. "Do not come out," he said, "no matter what you hear, unless I call your name. 3 times. She nodded from the darkness. He lowered the heavy door, the wood groaning softly. He slid the heavy iron bolt on its top, locking her in. He threw the rug back over it, kicking it until it lay flat and natural. He grabbed his own rifle, checked the load, and stepped onto the porch. He leaned against the post, forcing his body to relax, his heart hammering against his ribs. He made himself look annoyed. A homesteader interrupted. The 3 riders came on steady. Buck was growling now, his hackles raised. "Quiet, Buck," Eli murmured. The men rode into his yard and stopped, their horses blowing. They were hard cases. Their dusters were stiff with grime, their faces unshaven, their eyes small and mean. The man in the lead had a graying beard stained yellow with tobacco juice. He carried his rifle across his saddle, not in a scabbard. "Mornin'," the leader said. His voice was a gravelly rasp. Eli nodded. "Mornin'. Just passing through," the man said, his eyes moving over everything. The cabin, the barn, the smoke from the chimney. "You seen anyone this way? Traveling alone?" "I ain't seen a soul since the thaw," Eli said. His voice sounded calm, bored. "Just my cows and the dog." The leader looked at Buck. "Dog seems jumpy." "He don't like strangers." Another man, younger, with a vicious scar down his cheek, spat a stream of tobacco. "We're tracking Apache, a woman. Slipped her rope near the Verde Road about a week back." Eli kept his face blank. He leaned the rifle against the post. A casual movement, but it was within easy reach. "Apache, you say? Ain't seen no Apache here in 2 years. Not since the army cleared them out." The leader's eyes narrowed. He knew who Eli was. The whole territory knew. "That's so," the leader sneered. "Heard you was partial to 'em. Langford. Heard you even married one." Eli felt the blood rush to his head, a hot, killing rage. He kept his hands loose, away from the rifle. "My wife is dead. What I am is partial to men getting off my land, for they wear out their welcome." The 3 men exchanged glances. The scarred one shifted his hand to the pistol on his hip. The leader held up a hand. "Easy now. Just a friendly warning. There's a price on this one. A good price. $500. But the word is out from Prescott. Any man caught harboring a savage, aiding a fugitive. That's a hanging offense. The army don't take kindly to it." "I ain't harboring no one," Eli said, his voice flat. "I'm trying to drink my coffee." The leader scanned the property one last time. He looked at the small grave on the ridge, marked by a simple wooden cross. His lip curled. "You see her, you send word," he said. "She's dangerous. Killed a man. They say, when she ran, we'll be back through. We'll be checking." He pulled his horse's head around, a sharp, angry motion. "Let's ride." The 3 men rode out, heading south, following the wash. Eli did not move. He stood on the porch for a full hour, watching, until they were gone, until the dust they raised had settled, until the silence of the high desert had returned. He was shaking, not from fear, but from a cold, blinding rage. He had lied. He had stood there and lied to save her, and he knew, with a terrible certainty, that they would be back. He finally went inside. The cabin felt empty, cold. He stood over the rug, listening. There was no sound from below. He moved the rug, unbolted the door, and lifted it. "Nalin," he called. "Nalin, Nalin." A moment later, her head appeared. She climbed out, the rifle in her hand. Her face was pale, streaked with dirt from the cellar floor, but her eyes were burning. She had heard everything. "They will come back," she said. "I know." He bolted the cellar door, his movements sharp. "You can't stay here, not in the cabin. It's the first place they'll look." He went to the window, staring out at the ridge. He stared at the spot where Talika was buried. "Get your blanket," he said. "And the rest of the ammunition." "Where?" "There's a place, higher up, on the ridge." He took her up the steep slope behind the cabin, pushing through the thorny scrub oak and juniper. The climb was hard, and he had to pull her up over the rocks in places. She moved silently behind him, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. They passed the small, wind-swept grave. Eli paused, his hand on the rough wood of the cross. Nalin stopped beside him, her gaze on the pile of stones. She did not ask. She knew. "She was a good woman," Eli said, his voice thick. "We are not the same," Nalin whispered. "No," he said, "you're not." He led her another 100 yards, to a place where the rock face split. Hidden behind a curtain of wild grapevine and manzanita was a dark opening, a fissure in the rock. It was not a large cave, just a deep, dry overhang, maybe 20 feet deep and high enough for a man to stand. He had used it to store hides one winter. It was sheltered from the wind, and from below. It was invisible, but from its mouth, they could see the entire ranch, the yard, and the trail for 2 miles in every direction. "You'll stay here," he said. He spread her blanket over a thick bed of dry pine needles. "It's dry. It's safe." He gave her a sack with jerky, biscuits, and a full water skin. "Don't make a fire unless I signal. 3 shots. Fast. That means trouble. Otherwise, I'll come up. After dark. Only after dark." She sat on the blanket, the rifle across her knees, and looked out at the tiny cabin below. She looked small against the great wall of stone. "You will come back?" she asked. Her voice was small. "I'll come back," he promised. Thus began their secret life. The ranch became a stage, and Eli an actor. By day, he was the grieving widower, the reclusive rancher. He mended his fences. He tended his cattle. He rode his perimeter, always watching, his rifle always in his hand. He was careful to make his rides look random, but he was always checking for tracks, for any sign of the bounty hunters. But at night, the ranch was empty. As soon as full darkness fell, he would take Buck, fill a sack with hot food from his supper, and climb the ridge. The cave became their home. It was safer than the cabin. It was theirs. He would find her waiting, a shadow among shadows, the rifle always ready until she heard his voice. He would build a small, smokeless fire deep in the cave, the shielded glow painting their faces red. They would sit close, sharing the food from his tin plate, their shoulders touching. The air in the cave was cold, but their shared warmth was enough. They talked more in that cave than they ever had in the cabin. The darkness and the danger stripped away everything but the truth. She told him about the herbs that grew on the ridge, which ones healed, and which ones could kill. He told her about his father's farm in Missouri, how he had hated the flat, tame land. One night, the sky was so clear the stars looked like holes punched in a black ceiling. They lay on the blanket, watching the sky. The wind was quiet. "They called them the Sky People," Nalin said, pointing to a cluster of stars. "My grandmother said they watch us." "They're just stars," Eli said. "No, they are spirits. They see what we do." He turned, looking at her in the dim starlight. Her face was strong, her profile sharp against the rock. He saw the old, faint scar on her cheek. a thin white line he had never noticed before. He touched it. "Where did you get this?"
"My first husband,"
she said, her voice flat. "He did not like my words." Eli's hand clenched. He said nothing, but a cold anger, protective and fierce, settled in his chest. Their intimacy in the cave was different. It was not the desperate collision of the blizzard. It was slow. It was quiet. It was the only comfort they had. They would make love under the stars, their movements hushed, surrounded by the vast, dangerous silence of the night. It was an act of defiance, a way of feeling alive when death was riding the trails below. Weeks passed. The spring deepened. The wild plum bushes bloomed. Nalin's strength returned fully. The gaunt, hollow look was gone. Her body was lean and strong. Her eyes, which had been so empty, were now sharp and alive. One night, she was holding his hand, tracing the calluses on his palm. She had been quiet for a long time.
"Eli,"
she said softly.
"I'm here. If I live long enough,"
she said, her voice careful.
"I want a bear."
The words struck him like a stone. He turned to look at her.
"A child?"
he said, his voice thick. "My body is strong now. You have made me strong. You have fed me. You have kept me safe." She pressed his hand to her flat stomach. "I do not want to die empty. My people are gone. Your people hate me. If they kill me, I want something to be left, a life. From us." Eli was stunned. He had lost a child. He had lost Talika. The idea of a family was a door he had nailed shut and buried. He looked at Nalin, at her fierce, determined face. She was not asking for a home. She was not asking for love. She was asking for life. She was asking to create something that the world could not hunt, something that belonged only to them. He dreamed of it that night, a child, a son, or a daughter, a child with his eyes in her hair, a child of both worlds, belonging to neither, belonging only to this ridge, this wild, free canyon. It was a fragile, dangerous hope, and it terrified him. He did not answer her with words. He pulled her close, his answer given in the dark. The hope was a luxury. Reality returned. They were running low on flour, salt, and coffee. More importantly, they were low on cartridges. He had to go to Prescott. He hated it. He hated leaving her alone on the ridge. He hated the town, but they had no choice. "I'll be gone 2 days, he told her, packing his saddlebags. "Keep Buck with you. He'll warn you." He gave her his best rifle and took the spare. "Do not light a fire. Do not leave the cave. Shoot anything that is not me." She nodded, her face grim.
"Be safe, Eli."
He rode out, feeling her eyes on his back until he was over the ridge. Prescott was worse than he remembered. It was swollen with new miners and soldiers. The streets were thick mud. He felt exposed, his back naked to the whispers and hard stares. He got his supplies quickly, his head down, speaking to no one. As he was leaving the mercantile, he saw it. Nailed to the post outside the marshal's office was a new poster. He walked over, his stomach cold. Wanted. It had her name, Nalin. Apache female, 20 summers, black hair, small scar on left cheek. For murder and aiding fugitives, $700. Dead or alive. His blood turned to ice. $700. That was a fortune. That was enough to buy a man a ranch. It was enough to make every man in the territory a bounty hunter. It was enough to make them tear his ranch apart, board by board. He turned to go, pulling his hat low. "Mr. Langford." The voice was a dry whisper. He turned. It was Mrs. Miller, a gaunt woman from the tannery. She was clutching her shawl, pretending to look at a bolt of cloth outside the store. "Ma'am," he said, his voice wary.
"You ought to be careful,"
she whispered, her eyes darting around the street. She did not look at him. "Careful of what?" "I was out, my boy. He was looking for a stray calf, Near your land, last week." Eli's body went rigid. "He saw smoke, up on the ridge, where it shouldn't be, and he said he saw a woman, a dark woman, watching from the rocks." Eli's face was stone. "Your boy saw wrong. That's my land." "He knows what he saw," she hissed, stepping closer. "I told him to keep quiet, but my Hiram, that man Sykes, the bounty man, he was in the saloon, asking questions about you, about your preferences." She scurried away, pulling her shawl tight, disappearing into the crowd. The net was closed. They knew. They did not have proof, but they knew. He got his horse and rode out of town, not waiting for his wagon. He pushed the horse hard, his mind racing. $700. A witness. He did not take the main road. He cut through the back trails, the rocky canyons he knew better than anyone. He was halfway home when he stopped. He was in a narrow cut. The air still. He listened. He heard it, the scrape of a horseshoe on rock. Far behind him, but coming steady. He spurred his horse up the side of the wash, getting to high ground. He looked back. 2 riders, a mile back, moving fast. He recognized one of them. It was Sykes, the scarred man from the ranch. They had been waiting for him. They were following him. He could not lead them to the ranch. He could not lead them to the cave. He turned his horse north, away from his land, away from Nalin. He rode hard. He plunged into a dense thicket of manzanita, the branches tearing at his clothes. He pushed his horse down a steep shale slide, knowing the rock would not hold prints. He rode for 3 hours, a desperate, punishing ride, doubling back, crossing his own trail, using every trick the Apache had taught Talika, and Talika had taught him. At dusk, he was on a high mesa, 10 miles north of his land. His horse was lathered and trembling. He looked back. Nothing. The valley below was empty. He had lost them. But he knew they were out there. They were hunting. He did not get back to the ridge until it was past midnight. The moon was a sliver. He climbed the path, his body aching. Nalin was there, at the mouth of the cave, the rifle aimed at his chest. "It's me," he gasped. She lowered the rifle, her relief so strong he could feel it. He stumbled into the cave and dropped the supply sacks. He was covered in sweat, his shirt torn. "What is it?" she asked, seeing his face. "They are coming." "They were in town," he said, his voice rough. "There's a poster. It has your name, Nalin. They know your face. $700. She sucked in a breath. "A woman from town, her son. They saw you. They saw the smoke." He told her about the pursuit, how Sykes had followed him from town. "I lost them, but they won't stop. They know I'm hiding something. They'll be watching the ranch." He sat heavily on the blanket. "We can't stay. We can't stay in Arizona. We have to disappear." "Go?" she said. "Where? What town will take us?" "No town," Eli said. He looked at her, his heart heavy. "We have to go where they won't look, where they won't dare look." "Where?" she whispered, though she already knew. "Deeper south, into Apache country, into the high mesas." He watched her face, the strength that had held her up for all these months, the hope that had begun to grow. It all crumpled. This was the one thing he could say that would break her. She began to cry. It was not the loud sobbing of that first night in the barn. It was a silent, terrible weeping, the tears of a person pushed past the last edge of hope. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, Eli, not there." She grabbed the front of his torn shirt. "You do not understand. Those men, Sykes, they are just men. They hunt for money. My people, my people. They will hunt me as a traitor. They will find me, and they will stone me. They will kill me for what they think I did." Her voice broke. "They will kill you for being with me. They will kill us both." She let go, her hands falling to her lap. "I have no home.
Eli, the whites hunt me, the Apache hunt me. There is no place in this world for me.
He looked at her, this woman who had survived starvation, frostbite, and beatings, this woman who had offered him her body, and then her life. He saw her terror, and it cut through his own fear, his exhaustion, his grief for Talika, his shame, his anger at the world. It all burned away, leaving one hard, simple truth. He knelt in front of her. He took her hands. They were cold. "They won't kill you," he said. His voice was quiet, but it was not a promise. It was an oath. "Because they will have to kill me first." He pulled her to him, his arms locking around her, holding her tight against his chest. "You're right," he whispered into her hair, his own voice rough. "You have no home." He held her face, forcing her to look at him. "Then I'll be your home." They did not wait for dawn. They moved by the light of the waning moon, a pair of ghosts dismantling a life. Eli worked with a grim, focused energy. He packed the essentials onto his two most rugged horses: ammunition, flour, salt, dried venison, his tools, and every blanket they owned. He left the cabin itself untouched. It was the shed he cared about. He rolled his last barrel of kerosene into the small, dry shed built of pine. It was where he stored his tack, his forge, his tools, the things that had defined his old life. "It's the first place they'll look for tracks, for supplies," he said, his voice flat. "They'll see it. They'll think we took everything and burned what we couldn't carry. It'll confuse them. It'll buy us a day." Nalin watched him. She understood. This was not just a tactic. It was a funeral pyre. Eli stood at the door of the shed. He looked past it, up the ridge, to the small wooden cross he could not see in the dark. He was leaving her. He was leaving Talika. He had failed to protect her in life, and now he was abandoning her in death. The guilt was a physical weight, a stone in his gut.
"Eli,"
Nalin said softly from behind him. He did not turn.
"It is right,"
she said.
"The dead are dead. We are alive. We must run."
He nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He struck a match. The small flame flared, illuminating his hard, grieving face. He tossed it onto the oil-soaked rags. The whoosh of the fire was instant, a greedy, bright explosion that lit the yard in a flickering, terrible orange. Flames climbed the dry wood, roaring into the night sky, a beacon of their escape. "Now," he said. He grabbed the reins of the horses. He and Nalin mounted, with Buck, the dog, running silent at their heels. They did not look back at the fire. They did not look at the cabin. They rode south, toward the black, jagged silhouette of the distant mesas, into the heart of the country that had branded them both as outcasts. They traveled south toward Black Mesa, moving only at night. The days were spent hidden in rocky arroyos or deep in cedar thickets, the horses tethered and muffled. Eli, exhausted, would sleep for an hour or two while Nalin stood watch, the rifle in her hands, her eyes scanning the horizon. Then they would switch. It was a hard, silent journey. They were not a man and a woman. They were two animals, hunted and wary, bound by a shared need to survive. The land was unforgiving, a broken expanse of rock and thorn. Eli's knowledge of the back trails kept them safe. But it was Nalin who found the water, small seeps in the rock he would have passed, and the edible roots that supplemented their dwindling jerky. Eli's guilt gnawed at him. He had left his wife's grave. He had burned his own life to the ground. He had taken this second woman, this Apache woman, and instead of giving her the safety he promised, he was leading her back into the very danger she had fled. He was a failure, twice over. He grew quiet, his words clipped, his anger a hard shell around him. Nalin, in turn, grew more tense with every mile they moved south. This was her land, but it was not her home. Every shadow, every distant hawk cry made her jump. She was returning to her executioners. After 8 days of travel, they were desperate. One of the horses was lame, and Eli's leg, where he had been grazed by a branch, was inflamed. They were low on water and their food was almost gone. They were in a country of high canyons, near the Mexican border, a no-man's land frequented by bandits, soldiers, and Apache alike. They followed a thin trickle of water up a dry wash and found a small jacal, a hut built of ocotillo ribs and mud, tucked under a massive rock overhang. Smoke, thin and smelling of herbs, rose from a hole in the roof. Eli reined in, his rifle ready. "Stay here." He dismounted, his movement stiff. An old woman emerged from the hut. She was ancient, her face a map of wrinkles, her hair a long braid of silver and black. She was dressed in a mix of Mexican calico and Apache beadwork. She stood with a simple, profound stillness, holding a bundle of dried herbs, and watched him approach. She showed no fear. "I am looking for water," Eli said, his voice hoarse. The woman looked past him, at Nalin on the horse, at her Apache dress, at the fear in her eyes. "Agua hay," the woman said. Her voice was like dry leaves. "There is water and food for those who are hunted." She looked back at Eli. "Bring her. The dog can stay out." They entered the hut. It was one room, clean, smelling of herbs and corn. A small fire burned in a clay hearth. The woman pointed to a clay pot. "Atole," she said. "Eat." It was a thin corn gruel, but it was hot, and it was the best thing Eli had ever tasted. They ate in silence. The old woman watched Nalin, her black eyes missing nothing. "I am Isadora," she said, finally. "I am a healer. I live between the worlds. The Apache leave me be. The Mexicans trade with me. The white men fear me." "We are just passing," Eli said, his hand near his pistol. "No," Isadora said, her gaze fixed on Nalin. "You are not passing. You are running, and you," she said, pointing a long, thin finger at Nalin, "are the one they speak of." Nalin went rigid. "I do not know what you mean." "They say you are a traitor," Isadora said, her voice dropping to a low chant. "They say you gave your people to the soldiers. They say you are a whore for the whites." Nalin stood up, her face pale. "That is a lie." "I know," Isadora said. "I also know what really happened. I have ears. I hear the wind. I hear what the runners say when they think no one is listening." She rose, her small frame surprisingly steady. "I know of the woman who rode to the settler's post to warn the wife of the traitor. Her friend, I know she was caught. I know the warriors, blind with blood and rage, called her a spy. But I know they did not find her friend. The traitor's wife was hidden. She and her child lived." Isadora stepped closer to Nalin, her eyes fierce. "They call you traitor. I call you brave. You saved a life, at the cost of your own." Nalin stared at her. The words did not seem to register. "Brave?" she whispered. "You chose a friend over a tribe that was lost to madness," Isadora said. "You chose a life over a death. That is bravery. It is a thing your people have forgotten." The dam inside Nalin broke. She did not cry out. She made a sound, a low, tearing gasp, and she collapsed. She fell to her knees on the dirt floor and broke down, her body shaking with the force of her sobs. It was not the quiet, hopeless weeping Eli had seen before. This was a storm, a flood of all the terror, all the shame, all the hatred she had carried for months. She had believed she was a traitor. She had believed she was unclean, unwanted by anyone in the world. And this old woman, this stranger, had just given her back her name. Eli moved to go to her, but Isadora put a hand on his chest. "No, let the poison out. It has been in her too long." He stood there, helpless, as Nalin wept for her lost life, for her lost people, and for the single terrifying realization that she might not be the monster they said she was. They stayed with Isadora for 2 weeks. The canyon was a sanctuary. It was hidden, safe, and there was water. Isadora doctored Eli's leg, drawing the inflammation out with a poultice of herbs that smelled of pine and dust. She fed them, sharing her small stores of corn, beans, and dried meat. During the day, Eli worked. He repaired Isadora's small corral. He hunted, bringing back 2 rabbits, which felt like a feast. He worked to keep his hands busy, to keep his mind from the grave on the ridge. His guilt was a quiet sickness. He watched Nalin. She was healing, not just her body, but her spirit. She followed Isadora, learning about the herbs, grinding corn, and speaking in low, fast Apache, the words tumbling out of her. She was coming back to life. And he was still haunted. He had failed Talika. He had brought her to a hostile land, and his love had not been enough to protect her from the sickness, from the town's hatred, the doctor's refusal to come, the whispers in the street. It all played over in his mind. He saw Talika's face, pale and sweating, her hand clutching his, and his failure was so vast it choked him. He was doing it again. He was failing Nalin. He had promised her safety, and he had given her a life on the run. At night, in the small, cold darkness of the shed Isadora gave them, their bodies came together. It was not the tender, aching comfort of the blizzard. It was fierce. It was a raw, desperate claiming. It was as if they were trying to create a life so powerful it could defy the death that hunted them. One night, Nalin held him, her legs locked around his, her breath hot on his neck.
"Now, Eli,"
she whispered, her voice urgent.
"give me a child. Now, I am clean. I am strong."
He stopped, his body rigid above hers.
"Nalin, this is no life for a child. We are being hunted."
"That is why," she insisted, her hands gripping his hair, forcing him to look at her. Her eyes were bright in the darkness.
"They can kill me. They can kill you.
But if I carry your seed, if I carry a life, I win. I will carry you forward. Eli, even if I die, I will carry our life forward, where they cannot reach it." He looked at her, at this impossible, brave woman. She was not asking for a promise of safety. She was making one. She was offering to be his anchor, his legacy, his future. His guilt, his fear, it all dissolved in the face of her terrible, beautiful strength. He gave himself over to her, to the idea. He planted his seed. They lay tangled in the blankets, the night air cold. "When we leave," Eli said, his voice quiet, "we will not look for your people, and we will not look for mine." She turned to him. "Where, then?" "There are hidden places, valleys in the Dragoon Mountains, canyons in the Chiricahuas, places with water and grass, places no one has claimed. We can build our own life. No town, no tribe, just us. We can make our own home." She touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "Just us. I like this. I will go with you. Eli Langford." She agreed. It was a fragile, desperate plan, but it was theirs. The next morning, they prepared to leave. Isadora packed them a sack of food, dried corn, jerky, and a small bag of her healing herbs. "Go north from here," she instructed. "Then east. Follow the Hawk's path. You will find a pass. It will take you to the high country. It is a hard way, but no one will follow." She embraced Nalin, holding her tight. "Do not let them break you, daughter. You are the strong one." She looked at Eli. "You are a good man. You have a good heart, but you look backward too much. The dead are at peace. You must guard the living." Eli nodded, the words striking him. He helped Nalin mount, then swung onto his own horse. Buck stood at the trail. "Ready?" "God be with you, Isadora," Eli said. "God is always with me," she replied. "It is men you must worry about." They rode out of the canyon, their hopes higher than they had been in months. They had a plan. They had a destination. They had been riding for less than an hour when the world exploded. The shot came from the rocks above them. The bullet screamed past Eli's head, so close he felt the heat of it, and struck the rock beside him. showering him with stone chips.
Ambush!
Eli yelled, pulling his rifle from the scabbard. Another shot. Eli's horse screamed and stumbled. A bullet had grazed its flank. A third shot kicked up dirt at Nolan's feet.
Get down! Get to the rocks!
Eli roared, sliding from his horse. They were in a narrow wash, a perfect trap. 3 men were on the ridge above, firing down at them. Eli recognized the yellow-stained beard of the leader. Sykes. They had been followed, or they had been waiting. Eli shoved Nolan behind a cluster of boulders.
Stay down!
He rested his rifle on the rock, aimed, and fired. The shot was high. One of the men laughed.
Got you now, squaw man,
Sykes roared.
The woman's worth 700. You're worth a rope.
A bullet struck the rock near Eli's arm, and a shard of lead or stone tore through his sleeve. Slicing a hot, bloody line across his leg, he cried out, a sharp gasp of pain, and stumbled back.
Eli!
Nolan screamed.
I'm hit. It's my leg. Not bad, but I'm hit.
He was bleeding, the hot blood soaking his trousers. He saw Sykes stand up, confident, taking careful aim for the killing shot.
No,
Nolan whispered. She grabbed Eli's rifle. Before he could stop her, she was up and moving, scrambling up the other side of the wash like a lizard, using the cover of the scrub brush.
Nolan, no, get back!
Eli yelled, trying to stand, his leg buckling. She did not listen. She was moving, flanking them. One of the other men saw her and fired. The shot missed. Eli watched. His heart stopped. He was useless. He saw her stop. She was 50 yards from them, on a small ledge. She dropped to one knee, bringing the heavy rifle to her shoulder. She was calm. Her face was a mask of cold fury. She fired. The sound of the shot echoed in the canyon. The man who had been laughing, the younger one, grabbed his chest. He looked down, a look of profound surprise on his face. He dropped his rifle, toppled forward, and slid down the rocks, landing in a heap in the wash. Nolan did not pause. She worked the lever, ejected the shell, and chambered another round.
Sykes,
his face a mask of rage, turned his rifle on her, but he was too late. Eli fired his pistol, the shot small and tinny in the open air. It was wild, but it made Sykes duck. In that second, Nolan fired again. The shot took Sykes in the shoulder, spinning him around. He screamed, dropping his gun, and fell back, out of sight. The third man, seeing his leader and his partner down, panicked. He ran, scrambling back over the ridge, disappearing. Silence. The only sound was the wind, the heavy breathing of the horses, and the dripping sound of Eli's blood hitting the dust.
Nolan,
Eli called, his voice shaking. She stood up. She was trembling, her whole body vibrating with adrenaline. Her face was spattered with blood from the man who had fallen near her, but her eyes were calm. She walked back down the slope, the rifle held at her side, the barrel still smoking. She came to Eli and knelt, immediately tearing a strip from her own skirt to tie around his leg. Her hands were steady.
You are bleeding,
she said, her voice flat.
You killed him,
Eli said, staring at the body in the wash. She nodded, pulling the bandage tight, making him wince.
Yes, he was going to kill you.
She finished the knot and looked at him. She was covered in dirt and blood, and she was shaking, but she was whole. She had not panicked. She had not run. She had fought. They were silent for a long time. The man she shot was dead. Sykes was gone, wounded. The third man was gone.
We have to bury him,
Eli said, gesturing to the dead man.
And get out of here. The other one will be back. Or he'll bring more.
It took an hour. Eli's leg was stiff, but he could walk. They dragged the body into a shallow ditch and covered it with rocks. It was grim, hard work. They did not speak. When they were done, they stood over the shallow grave, panting. Eli looked at Nolan. She was wiping the blood from her face with a corner of her sleeve, her expression unreadable.
"I've known men who have fought in the war," Eli said, his voice quiet and rough. "I've seen soldiers and rangers. I have never, in my whole life, seen anyone braver than you, Nalin."
She looked up at him, her dark eyes meeting his. She did not smile. She simply nodded, accepting his words as a simple, hard truth. She picked up the rifle, checked the load, and handed it back to him.
"Let's go," she said. "We have to find our valley."
They rode with the ghost of the man Nalin had killed. They rode with the knowledge of the two men who had escaped. One of them wounded, both of them fueled by a greed that would not die easily. They pushed south and east into the broken, high country, a land of sheer red cliffs and deep, shadowed canyons. Eli's leg throbbed with every step his horse took. Nalin was silent, her face a mask. She had taken a life to save his, and the act had hardened her, drawing a veil over the softness that had begun to grow. They were fugitives again, but this time they were fugitives bound by blood, both shed and shared. They followed Isadora's cryptic map, the Hawk's Path, the shadow of the Twin Peaks, the dry riverbed that turned to sand. For weeks, they traveled deeper into the territory, moving near the edge of Navajo land, a place where neither Apache nor white man staked a firm claim. The land was beautiful and terrible, a vast, empty cathedral of stone. And then they found it. After a grueling climb up a narrow pass, they stood on a ridge looking down. Below them, shielded on three sides by towering walls of sandstone, was a valley. It was not large, perhaps a mile long and half as wide, but it was perfect. A thin stream, fed by a spring high on the cliff wall, cut through the center, greening the land. There were cottonwoods by the water, a thick stand of juniper on the slopes, and patches of deep, fertile earth. They saw the tracks of deer by the stream and rabbits in the brush. It was hidden. It was defensible. It was alive. Eli dismounted, his bad leg almost giving way. He stood, his hand on his horse's flank, and just breathed. Buck, the dog, ran down the slope, plunging his head into the stream, lapping at the clean water. Nalin slid from her horse. She walked to the edge of the stream, knelt, and touched the water. She looked up at Eli, her eyes, for the first time in weeks, holding something other than fear.
"Our valley,"
she whispered. They began to build. It was not a life, not yet. It was survival. Eli's first task was a shelter. He found a place where the canyon wall was concave, a natural overhang. Using the rock as a back wall, he dug into the earth, deepening the space. He cut cottonwood and juniper beams, his axe strokes echoing in the silence. He and Nalin built a roof of beams, thatched it with branches, and packed it with thick, insulating earth. It was not a cabin. It was a dugout, half cave, half shelter. It was low and dark, but it was warm, and from the clearing, it was nearly invisible. The seasons turned. The high, pale blue of spring deepened into the white-hot sky of summer. The canyon was an oven by day, but the dugout remained cool. Eli hunted. His rifle, used sparingly, provided venison. He set snares, and they ate rabbit and quail. Nalin, meanwhile, foraged. She found the bounty of the canyon, wild onions, yucca roots, patches of amaranth, and mesquite beans she could grind into a coarse, sweet flour. She was Apache, and this land, though strange, spoke a language she understood. The months passed, marked not by a calendar, but by the movement of the sun and the moon. They were utterly alone. They saw no one. They heard no human sound save their own voices. The vast, crushing silence of the territory was their shield. And in that isolation, Nalin's body changed. Her belly, flat and lean from starvation and travel, began to swell. At first, it was a secret, a small firmness Eli could feel when he held her in the dark. Then, As summer faded and the nights grew crisp, it became a visible, undeniable truth. She was carrying his child. The knowledge of the life growing inside her changed everything. Their quiet, functional intimacy deepened, becoming something more tangible. Eli, a man hollowed by loss, found himself watching her with a fierce, protective tenderness he thought had been buried on the ridge near Prescott. He was a man who spoke with his hands, not his words. In the long afternoons, when the heat kept them in the shade, he began to work. He had kept the thigh bone of the first deer he killed in the valley. With his skinning knife, he scraped, sanded, and polished it, the white bone gleaming in the sun. He worked for weeks, his movements slow and patient. He carved it into a comb. It was simple, heavy, and strong, the teeth even and smooth. On the handle, he etched a small, clumsy shape. It was meant to be a bird. He gave it to her one evening. He pressed it into her hand without a word. Nalin looked at it, her fingers tracing the carved lines. She did not thank him. She simply turned, and with the comb, began to draw the tangles from her long, black hair. It was a ritual of possession, of acceptance. In return, she gave him her voice. As her body grew, she began to sing. In the evenings, sitting by their small, smokeless fire, she would sing the old songs, the ones her grandmother had taught her. They were songs of the earth, of the rain, of the creation of the people. Eli did not understand a single word, but the sound of her voice, a low, haunting melody, filled the canyon. It was a sound of peace, of a life being reclaimed. He would watch her, her face calm in the firelight, her hands resting on the swell of her belly, and a deep, cold fear would mix with his love. He had been here before. He had loved an Apache woman. He had watched her belly grow, and he had lost her. The memory, always simmering beneath the surface, rose up in him, sharp as a blade. He was back in Prescott. It was 4 years ago. Talika was alive. She was not yet showing, but they knew. They were walking the main street, her hand tucked in his arm. He was proud. He was defiant. Cyrus Finch, a drunkard and a mule skinner with a soul as rotten as his teeth, had stumbled out of the saloon. He saw them. He spat a stream of tobacco juice at Talika's feet. "Mornin', Langford." Finch had slurred, his eyes thick with malice. "Taking your squaw for a walk?" Eli had felt the blood rush to his head. He gripped Talika's arm, tried to pull her past. "Let's go." But Finch, emboldened by the audience on the boardwalk, stepped in front of them, blocking their path. He reached out and grabbed Talika's arm. "How much, Langford?" Finch sneered, his foul breath washing over them. "I'll give you 2 bits. A whore's a whore, ain't she? Even an Apache one." Eli did not remember drawing his pistol. He did not remember deciding to hit him. He just remembered the red-hot wave of rage. He remembered the feel of the steel pistol barrel connecting with Finch's jaw, the wet crunch of bone. Finch had fallen, and Eli had gone with him. He had kicked him. He had dropped his pistol and used his fists, his boot heels, his entire body. He remembered the sound of Finch's ribs cracking. He would have killed him right there in the street. It had taken 3 men from the saloon to haul him off, his knuckles and shirt bloody. He'd spent a week in the town jail. The marshal, a weary man named Cobb, had let him go. Finch was a problem, and most men figured he had it coming. But the cost was absolute. He had crossed a line. He was no longer the town's quiet, peculiar recluse. He was the violent, animal-loving squaw man. He was dangerous. That was when his standing vanished. That was when the mercantile owners started charging him double for feed. That was when Mrs. Miller, the woman who had warned him about Nalin, crossed the street to avoid him. And that was when Dr. Hayes had told him, cold and flat, that he would not be available for his wife's confinement. That beating, that single act of rage, had cost him Talika. He had failed to protect her, not from Finch, but from his own violence. He looked at Nalin, singing her soft song to the child in her womb. The same rage, the same fierce protective fire was still in him, but it was colder now. It was buried deeper, and he knew. If anyone ever threatened her, he would not stop at a beating. He would finish the job. The peace of the valley was a fragile, thin ice. One night, winter had begun to touch the canyon, the air sharp and cold. Eli was woken by a sound. It was Nalin. She was fighting the blankets, her body rigid, her hands clawing at her own throat. A low, choked sound was coming from her, a sound of absolute terror.
No,
She was gasping, her eyes wide open but seeing nothing.
please, no, brother, no.
Eli grabbed her, pulling her upright.
Nalin, wake up. You're here. It's me. You're safe.
She came awake with a violent, tearing gasp. She stared at him, her eyes wild. Before she recognized him, she collapsed against his chest, her body shaking so hard her teeth chattered.
The stones,
She whispered, her voice broken.
I was in the pit. They were all there. My cousins, my brother, they were standing above me. They were holding stones.
She was slick with cold sweat. He held her, his arms a vice around her.
They were shouting, "Traitor!"
She sobbed, her words muffled against his shirt.
My brother, he held the first stone. He said I was dead to the people. He raised his arm. I could see the rock.
It was a dream, Eli said, his voice rough. He stroked her hair, his own heart pounding. Just a dream. They are not here. I am here. He held her. He did not offer any more empty words. He just held her, a solid living wall against the phantoms. He held her as she shook, as the terror slowly receded, leaving a cold, trembling exhaustion. He held her until the first gray light of dawn touched the canyon wall, and her breathing finally evened into sleep. He looked at her scarred back in the dim light. He had seen the marks on her skin, but this was the first time he had seen the ones inside. He knew, with a cold certainty, that they would never truly be free. Their sanctuary was violated a week later. Eli was up canyon, checking his snares, Buck at his heel. The dog stopped, his head raised, a low growl starting deep in his chest. Eli froze. He listened. He heard nothing. But Buck was insistent, his gaze fixed back toward their shelter. Eli ran. He moved silently, his rifle in his hand, using the rocks for cover. He reached the edge of their clearing and stopped. A man was there. He was tall and thin, dressed in buckskins and a blue trade blanket. He was not Apache. He was Navajo. He held a bow and a long, old trade rifle. He was staring at the dugout. Nalin stood in the doorway. She was holding Eli's other rifle, and it was aimed at the center of the man's chest. Her face was pale, but her hands were steady. The scout saw Eli emerge from the rocks. He did not startle. He had known Eli was there. He smiled, a thin, humorless expression. "You build a life on our land," the scout said. His English was broken, but clear. "This is Dineland. You are not welcome." Eli walked into the clearing, his rifle level. "We're just passing through." The scout laughed, a short, sharp sound. "You have been passing for 3 moons. I have watched you. You hunt. You build." His eyes slid to Nalin, to her swollen belly. "You breed." "State your business," Eli said, his voice cold. "My business is this." The scout gestured to their horses, to the drying rack of meat. "You have good things, good horses, good rifles. You have food. I am a poor man. You will share." "We have nothing to share," Eli said. The scout's smile vanished. "I have been to the Fort Defiance. The soldiers look for an Apache woman, a woman who killed a man. They have a paper. It pays much money." Eli's blood turned to ice. He had hoped they were too far, too hidden. "You give me one horse," the scout said, pointing to Eli's bay. "You give me the good rifle you hold, and you fill a sack with meat and flour." He stepped closer, his arrogance growing. "You give me this, and I do not tell the soldiers. They will pay me for the information. But you will pay me to be quiet." Eli looked at Nalin. He saw the nightmare in her eyes. He saw her hand tighten on the rifle. He saw her terror that this man would bring the world, the stones, the soldiers, crashing down on them. "No," Eli said. The scout stared, his arrogance turning to surprise. "No? You heard me. We ain't giving you a thing. You're going to turn around, and you're going to walk out of this canyon. And you're going to forget you ever saw us." The scout's face darkened with anger. "You are a fool. White man. You will die here." He raised his rifle. Eli did not wait. He did not aim to shoot. He lunged, covering the 10 feet between them in 2 long strides. He slammed the heavy stock of his rifle into the scout's chin. The sound of the impact, a sharp crack, echoed in the clearing. The scout's rifle went off, the shot blasting harmlessly into the air. But the scout was tough. He staggered back, spitting blood, and swung his rifle like a club. Eli ducked, the stock whistling over his head. It was a brutal, close fight. They were too close for rifles. Eli dropped his and drove his fist into the scout's gut. The scout grunted and brought his knee up, catching Eli in his bad leg. Pain, white-hot and sharp, shot up Eli's side. He stumbled. The scout pulled a long, glittering knife from his belt. He slashed, and Eli threw his arm up. The blade bit deep into his forearm. Eli roared, a sound of pure rage. He ignored the pain. He grappled with the scout, his hands finding the man's throat. They fell, rolling in the dirt, kicking and punching. Eli was stronger, but the scout was fighting for his life, his knife flashing. Eli saw the blade coming toward his face. He twisted, grabbing the man's wrist, and slammed it against the ground. The scout's hand opened. The knife fell. Eli scrambled, his hand closing around a heavy, fist-sized stone from the edge of their fire pit. The scout was trying to get up. Eli brought the stone down, hard, on the side of the man's head. There was a sickening, wet crunch. The scout's body went rigid, then limp. Silence. The canyon was suddenly terribly quiet. The only sounds were Eli's own ragged, gasping breaths, and the drip of blood from his arm onto the dry earth. He pushed himself up, his body screaming, his bad leg on fire. He had killed again. He looked up. Nalin was standing in the doorway, frozen, her face ashen. Her hands were pressed tight against her belly, as if to protect the child from what she had seen. She was staring at the body, at the blood, at him. They buried him. It was a grim, silent task. They dragged the body to a deep crevice at the far end of the canyon and covered it with stones. It took hours. Eli's arm, hastily bandaged, throbbed with every rock he lifted. That night, they sat by the fire. The meat Nalin had cooked lay untouched. The sanctuary was gone. The canyon was a tomb. Nalin began to rock, a low, keening sound in her throat, the same sound she had made in the barn, a lifetime ago. "Death follows me," she whispered, her voice hollow. The life that had returned to her was gone, drained away by the blood in the clearing. "It followed me from my people. It followed me to your ranch. It found me here." She looked at Eli, her eyes dead. "I will never be free, Eli. It will always find me. It will find this child. We are cursed." Eli's own exhaustion was a physical weight. His body ached, his soul ached. But her despair, her absolute surrender, broke through his pain. He went to her, kneeling in the dirt, ignoring the scream from his leg. He took her face in his hands, his bloody bandage pressing against her cheek. "Listen to me," he said, his voice fierce, desperate. "Before you,
I was a dead man. I was hollow. I was a ghost, just waiting for the wind to blow me away. You came. You made me fight. You made me live." He pressed his forehead to hers, forcing her to feel his presence, his life. "You gave me back my life, Nalin. You gave me love. You gave me this child." He pulled back, his eyes locked on hers, trying to pour his own strength into her. "That is all the freedom I need. You are all the freedom I need." Tears ran down her face, washing away the dead. Hollow look. She was about to speak, to answer him, when her entire body seized. A sharp, terrified cry was ripped from her throat. She arched back, her hands flying to her belly, clutching it. "Eli!" she gasped. He looked down. A dark stain was spreading on her dress. Water, and then a bright, shocking splash of blood. "It is too soon," she panted, her eyes wide with a new, immediate terror. "It is not time." She cried out again, a long, sharp sound of pure pain that echoed off the canyon walls. The fight, the fear, the death. It had been too much. She was in labor, months too early, and they were alone. The sky, which had been a clear, cold blue for weeks, turned the color of a fresh bruise. The wind did not rise slowly. It fell upon the canyon like a hammer. It came from the north, a sudden, brutal change in the air, bringing with it a biting, impossible cold. And then came the snow. It was not the gentle snow of the lower desert. This was a high-country blizzard, a premature, violent storm that descended in an instant, a solid wall of white that sealed the canyon, burying the world in a matter of hours. Inside the dugout, Eli had built the fire as high as it would go. The air was thick with smoke, the smell of juniper, and the sharp, metallic scent of fear. Nalin's cry was not a moan. It was a sharp, terrified sound, ripped from her throat. "Eli, it is wrong. It is too soon." He saw the blood. It was not a small stain. It was a bright, terrible soaking of the blankets beneath her. The death of the scout, the terror, the long journey. It had broken something. "No," Eli whispered. His mind flew back. A terrible, vivid memory, Talika, the small cabin in Prescott, the smell of sickness, the helpless waiting, the way the light had left her eyes. "No, not again." He was not a healer. He was a rancher. He knew the bodies of horses, not women, but he was all she had. "Breathe, Nalin," he commanded. His voice was rough, a harsh sound meant to mask the panic that was clawing at his throat. "Breathe, like you told me you do when you run. You have to breathe." The labor was a storm, mirroring the one that raged outside. It was fast, violent, and wrong. It did not seem to last for hours. It seemed to last for a lifetime. The small dugout was a hot, smoky hell, filled with Nalin's sharp cries and his own desperate, muttered prayers. He was a man of action, but here there was no action to take. He tore strips from their cleanest blanket. He boiled water in the kettle, though he did not know what he would use it for. He held her hands, his knuckles white, his own body shaking. He watched her face, pale and slick with sweat, her eyes rolling back in her head. "Don't you leave me!" he growled, his voice breaking. He leaned close, his mouth to her ear, shaking her shoulder. "You hear me? You stay. You are brave. You fought them all. You stay. You stay with me." He nearly lost her. The blood kept coming, a terrifying flow that seemed to have no end. She was fading. Her grip on his hands, which had been strong enough to break bone, was weakening. Her cries, once so sharp, were turning to low, animal moans. He felt her life slipping away, thin as the wind. He thought of the Navajo scout he had killed. He thought of the bounty hunter she had killed. Death was in the canyon. It was in the dugout, reaching for her, reaching for the child. And just as he believed all was lost, just as the blizzard screamed its loudest against the rock,
She gave one final, body-tearing push. A child slid into his trembling, bloody hands. It was impossibly small. It was blue, and it was terrifyingly silent. Eli's heart stopped. He had lost them both. He had failed again. He cleared the baby's mouth with his little finger, his movements clumsy, frantic. He saw the child's still chest. He leaned down and blew a short, sharp puff of air into its face. A tiny, sputtering cough, a thin, reedy wail that was barely louder than the wind. It was alive. He laughed, a dry, choked sound. "It's a girl, Nalin. We have a girl." But Nalin did not answer. Her eyes were closed. Her breathing was a faint, shallow whisper. And the bleeding, the terrible, relentless bleeding, was worse. "No," Eli said, his voice hard as iron. He laid the wailing baby on Nalin's stomach, on the blanket, and turned his full, desperate attention to her. He remembered Isidora's herbs, but he did not know which was which. He threw the bag aside. "Rags, cold, pressure." He grabbed the remaining strips of blanket, plunged them into the icy, snow-fed water in the barrel by the door, and pressed them hard against her. He fought the gush of warm blood, packing the cold rags against her. His hands, his arms, covered in it. He held the pressure, pushing down with all his weight. His teeth gritted, his face a mask of fury. "You will not die," he whispered, his voice a low snarl. "I will not let you. I will not bury another wife. Do you hear me? Nalin, you will not die." He held on. He did not know for how long. The baby cried. The fire crackled. The storm raged against the small door. He held on until his arms ached, until the muscles in his back screamed, until the blood slowed, and finally, mercifully, seemed to stop. He collapsed back, his body shaking, his breath coming in sobs. He looked at Nalin. She was pale as the snow outside, her face like a death mask, but her chest was rising and falling. A faint, shallow breath. She was alive. He had not failed. Not this time. He turned to the child. He cleaned her gently, his rough hands, stained with her mother's blood and the scout's, surprisingly tender. He wrapped her in a piece of his own woolen shirt. He looked at her small, perfect, red face. She had a shock of black hair, thick and straight. She quieted, and her eyes opened. They were dark, deep, and steady. Nalin's eyes. Then the baby yawned, her tiny mouth stretching, and he saw it. In the corner of her right cheek, a small, perfect indentation. His dimple. A sound he did not recognize came from his throat, a sound of such profound relief it was almost painful. He had a daughter. The blizzard lasted for 3 days. For those 3 days, Eli did not sleep. He moved between Nalin and the fire, a silent, weary guardian. He fed her broth and water. He kept the dugout warm, and he held the tiny, fragile child. He had named her Anna. She was too small, her limbs thin as twigs, but she had a fierce, strong cry. On the 4th day, the storm broke. The sun emerged, blinding and white, turning the canyon into a silent, glittering jewel. The world was new. Nalin was weak, her body battered, but she was alive. She sat propped against the dugout wall, her black hair unbound, watching him. Eli was rocking Anna, who was restless. He did not know how to soothe a child. He was a man of silence, of harsh movements, but he looked at this small creature, his daughter, and he felt a softening in his chest he had thought long dead. He began to hum. It was a low, rough sound, the only tune he knew. It was Talika's. He cleared his throat, and his voice awkward and rusty. He began to sing. It was an Apache song, one she had sung while she worked, one she had sung in the last, terrible days of her sickness. He did not know the words, only the sounds, the melody. It was a song of the high desert, of the wind and the hawk. The baby quieted, her dark eyes fixed on his face. He looked over at Nalin. She was watching him, and the tears were running freely down her cheeks. They were not the tears of her nightmare, not the sobs of her captivity. They were quiet, soft tears of release. He stopped singing, a flush of shame on his face. It was hers, Talika's. I'm sorry. Nalin shook her head, her hand reaching for him, her fingers weak. Do not stop, she whispered, her voice rough. It is a good song, a song of a good woman. It is good for our daughter to hear it. She understood. She understood his grief, his past, and she was not jealous of it. She was making room for it, making it part of their new life. Eli swallowed the lump in his throat. He took Nalin's hand, his other arm holding their daughter. He sat beside her, and in the quiet of the snowbound canyon, he sang Talika's lullaby to his daughter, held in the arms of the woman he loved. The past and the present were no longer at war. They were just a family, in a shelter, safe. Spring came, and with it, life exploded in the canyon. The snows melted, feeding the stream. The cottonwoods grew thick with green leaves. The slopes were covered in a carpet of blue and yellow wildflowers. Their small homestead, which had been a desperate shelter, became a home. The child, Anna, thrived. She had survived the early, dangerous weeks. She grew plump, her black hair shining, her eyes watching everything. Eli worked with a purpose he had not felt in years. He was no longer just surviving. He was building. He was a father. He cleared a patch of the rich bottomland. Nalin, her strength returned, planted the corn and beans Isadora had given them. She planted wild gourds. Eli, using the hides from his deer, built a fence around the small plot. It was not to keep cattle in. It was, he told her, to keep the world out. He tamed the land, not by breaking it, but by fitting into it. He reinforced the dugout, built a stone hearth, and fashioned a small, solid door from juniper planks. And in the long, warm evenings, he whittled. He found a straight, strong branch of aspen. He carved and smoothed it, day after day, until it was a cradle. It was simple, solid, and deep. He lined it with a soft, tanned rabbit pelt. Nalin would sit outside the dugout, Anna in her lap, and she would talk. She spoke in Apache, her voice soft. She pointed to the hawk. Gagi. She pointed to the water. Tu. She pointed to Eli. As he worked. Hastian, my man, my husband. She was giving her daughter a history. She was giving her the words of the people who had cast her out, not as a curse, but as a heritage. The final challenge arrived with the summer heat. Eli was checking the fence line. Buck, lying in the shade, did not growl. He stood, his tail giving one uncertain wag. Eli looked up. A man was standing at the mouth of the canyon, not 50 yards away. He was Apache. He was not a scout. He was on foot, his moccasins worn through. He was thin, gaunt, and he held no weapon, save for a knife at his belt. Eli's rifle was in his hand in an instant. Nalin, he called, his voice low. Inside, take the child. Nalin came to the doorway, Anna on her hip. She saw the man. Her entire body went rigid. The softness of motherhood vanished, replaced by the hard, cold mask of the fugitive. Talin, she whispered. The name was a curse. It was the man from her nightmare, her older brother. Talin took one step forward, his hands held out, palms empty. In one hand, he held 2 hawk feathers. In the other, a small, dried piece of deer meat, an offering. Eli moved to stand between Nalin and the intruder. That's far enough. Talin looked at Eli, his eyes dull and full of a pain so old it looked like death. He was not the proud warrior from Nalin's memory. War and loss had ravaged him. His hair was streaked with gray. A long, puckered scar ran from his eye to his chin. pulling his mouth into a permanent grimace. He ignored Eli. His gaze was fixed on Nalin. "Sister," he said. His voice was a dry rattle. "I am not your sister," Nalin said. Her voice was pure ice. "You are not welcome. I have a rifle. Leave this place. Leave, before I kill you." She was ready to... Eli could feel the rage coming off her. This man was the one who had held the stone. "I have walked," Talon said, his voice breaking. "I have walked for 2 moons. I followed the rumors. A white man who fought bounty hunters. A dead scout. I came to see..." He looked around the small, thriving homestead. "I found you." "Leave," Nalin said again, raising the rifle she had taken from Eli. Talon looked at the rifle. He looked at the white man beside her, a man who clearly loved her. He looked at the baby on her hip, a child with her eyes. The last of his strength seemed to leave him. He fell to his knees. He dropped the offerings in the dust. He covered his face with his hands, and his body was racked with sobs. He wept, a terrible, dry, gagging sound that echoed in the quiet canyon. "I was wrong," he choked out, his words muffled by his hands. "I was blind. We were all blind." Nalin did not move. Her face was stone. "The war, it took everyone," Talon gasped, lowering his hands. His face was a mask of tears and dust. "Our mother, dead. Our cousins, dead. The white woman, the one you warned. She found me. She told me you saved her. You saved her children." He looked up at her, his eyes pleading. "They called you traitor. I called you traitor. But you were the only one who was brave. You were the only one who saw the truth. I was wrong. I was wrong." He bowed his head, his forehead touching the dust. He did not ask for forgiveness. He just knelt, a broken man. Eli watched Nalin. This was her moment. This was her choice. He kept his rifle ready, but he did not move. Nalin's hands were shaking. The rifle barrel wavered. She looked at this man, her brother, the source of her deepest wound. She looked at his gray hair, his scarred face, the empty look of a man who had lost everything. Her face, so hard, began to crumple. The ice was melting. Slowly, she lowered the rifle. She did not go to him. She did not speak, but she did not tell him to leave again. Forgiveness was not a word. It was a silence. It was the slow, aching bloom of peace where hatred had been. Eli watched his wife. She stood in the sunlight, her child on her hip, her enemy at her feet. She looked at the mountains, at the sky, at her new home, and for the first time since he had found her, half dead by his trough, Nalin stood tall. She was proud. She was whole. That night, Talon slept by the fire, outside the dugout. He would leave in the morning. A great weight had been lifted from the canyon. Inside, the air was warm. Anna was asleep in the new cradle Eli had made. Eli and Nalin lay on their blankets, the baby sleeping soundly between them. Her small hand curled around Eli's finger. They watched the firelight flicker on the low ceiling. They were quiet for a long time. Nalin turned on her side, looking at him. "You took a woman no one wanted," she said, her voice soft but clear. "The whites hunted me. My people hated me. I was broken. I was worth nothing. You took me in, and you made me wanted." Eli looked at her. He saw the woman who had offered him her life at the trough. He saw the woman who had fought in the blizzard. He saw the woman who had killed for him. He saw the mother of his child. He reached out, his rough hand tracing the line of her cheek. "Nalin," he said, his voice thick. "I was a dead man. I was an empty house. I had nothing to live for. You came. You gave me back the will to live." He pulled her close, his lips against her hair. "I will never regret choosing you." They lay in the silence. Outside, the wind blew across the wild, free canyon, and in the dugout, from the small cradle, came the soft, sleeping cry of a child. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We would be so honored if you would comment and let us know where in the world you are listening from. Please be sure to subscribe to From Wild West for more stories like this one, and share your thoughts with us in English.